You're listening to What She Said on Canada Talks.
We are in studio today, Christine Bentley and me, Kate Wheeler. We are joined by author, law professor, and Toronto-based international expert on reducing the harm of risky behavior, Bill Bogart. So, again, welcome to the show, Bill. And today we're talking about people who are obese or just fat, and the arguments around how to protect them from bias and discrimination.
So let's talk about the discrimination, because we're talking about how, in effect, to stop that. How rampant is it, in your view?
You know, I think it's pretty widespread, actually, and we have some pretty prominent individual examples that I can give you, but we also have some fairly rigorous social science on the matter. So, for example, there was a longitudinal study from the University of Wisconsin. Now, longitudinal studies are studies where they follow people for a significant period of time. And it followed 10,000 graduates from the University of Wisconsin over a period of years. And it was demonstrated repeatedly that obese people, particularly obese women, consistently had harder time getting a job, were consistently paid lower wages than those that were similarly situated, and experienced significant barriers in terms of promotion and other features of the job market. The Atlantic had a story last spring that again documented the barriers for obese people, again, particularly women. I'm not saying this problem is confined exclusively to women, but I do think it disproportionately impacts women, and demonstrated again all sorts of systemic barriers that obese people, particularly women, have in the job market. Reinforce the point that we all know that there are very few women in the corner offices of corporate America and Canada. There are almost no obese women. So those are the kinds of studies that I'm referring to. I'll give you lots of other examples if you want.
Well, let me give you an example. When I was working at CTV, we went in for diversity education. And the gentleman, who's also a former reporter, was giving the discussion and talking about all the different things that, should be included. And I raised my hand and said, what about weight? You don't discuss anything here about weight. And there was a large, I would say clinically obese woman in the room. Mm. And she was like nodding at me, like, yeah, go for it, go for it. But they looked, the people organizing this lecture looked at me like I was crazy. I said, to me, I don't know if there is a technical term. At the time, I called it weightism, and he thought I said whiteism, which made the whole thing even more complex. Mm-hmm. But there is. I know that this particular woman was discriminated against because people thought she was, quote, fat and lazy, mm-hmm. and that she didn't get advanced, and she should have been promoted.
Yeah. And I've many examples of that as well. Which is not to say that there aren't indications of progress. And the example that I've used in a previous HuffPost is Candy Crawley, an older woman, a heavier woman, but an absolutely fantastic journalist. And she is certainly. We've seen barriers, her taking down barriers, and of course there was that woman in Minnesota TV a couple of years ago. I don't remember if you remember the story, and
she responded to her critique.
Exactly,
yes,
exactly.
I do
so
that.
there's definitely pushback, but you're absolutely right. I do think media is a place where we find high levels of discrimination against obese people, again, particularly women. And I'll just give you one more example. Sotomayor, who, as you know, is Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. During her confirmation hearings, many people commented on her appearance. She is nowhere near what one would say is obese. So by whatever standards, one cannot rationally suggest that she's not up for the job. But there are all sorts of comments about, oh, well, she's too heavy, she's not going to last long. and of course, she's gone on to a brilliant career on the Supreme
Yet we
Court of
seem
Unity.
sympathetic to somebody like Oprah. We watch her with her weight struggles. At one stage, she was
Yes.
very large, and then
Yes.
she was very thin doing the liquid diets, and
then
now
goes
she's
back and
she's yo-yoed
Yes.
a lot. But we seem to give. Do we give people more credence if we like them?
That may be. She's also extremely powerful. I mean, she
Yes, yeah.
has torn
Yes,
down
Sonia
so
Mayer.
many. Yes, but Oprah has the microphone, and Oprah has the cash.
right.
To her credit, I mean, this is a heavy black woman. So
Right.
3 strikes, and she's overcome them all. And I also think that there's a sort of fascination with her weight challenges. I mean, people can identify with that. So in a typical Oprah fashion, she's turned a negative into something one might say as a positive. But so she may be the exception. I do stand my ground on maintaining there's a lot of stigma and prejudice against fat people.
Well, you said earlier, Bill, that it was the media, but do you not find that the man on the street or the woman on the street, that this is not just media, this is day-to-day stuff with ordinary people who have a bias against weight?
Oh, no, no, fair enough. It's not just media produced by any means. And, there are also documented studies of the health professions and the barriers that obese people face in terms of getting good health care because of the negative stereotypes that many doctors and nurses have against overweight people. Now, I am not for moments condemning the health professions by and large. I mean, I think, so many of them are doing so many good things to address healthy eating and physical activity, but there certainly are studies that demonstrate that heavy people do sometimes have a difficulty accessing treatment because of their weight.
I don't even begin to understand that. What does that mean? That somebody would say, well,
we're not going to give you the heart surgery because you're
going to
clog
die
your
anyway.
arteries.
Well, there's that sort of, or just they're not listened to. They're not the same amount of time is not spent with them, counseling them in various ways.
So where does that come from? Is that a perception that if you obviously don't have the willpower or whatever, or don't care enough to make yourself physically healthy, then why am I going to waste the time?
I think there's something.
I
think there's something to that. Look. I think the core assumption here that we have to deal with is that obesity is a lifestyle issue. People choose to be fat, and therefore they can choose to be thin.
Crap.
Okay. So,
yes.
I want to say immediately, and if you'll see this consistently in my Huffington Post and my book, Regulating Obesity, I'm all for people eating nutritiously. I'm all for people being physically active. And nobody gets off the hook in that regard.
Right.
Whether you're male, female, young, old, fat, thin. But at the end of the day, there are very complicated reasons why people are obese that go beyond simply eating excessively.
And they are physical reasons. People, hormones come into play, genetics come into play. We don't even understand.
Pollutants come into
all
play.
Kinds of things that we don't even quite fully understand come into play.
Yeah, and these are not fringe opinions, right?
And it used to be in the old days that people would say, well, I'm thin-boned, I'm big-boned, and nonsense.
Yeah.
Some people genetically can sit and eat Haagen-Dazs 48 hours out of 24 and are still 20 pounds underweight. They're skin and bone. Why is that? We don't exactly know.
Oh, I wish somebody would figure it out.
I know.
Okay, so is deeming obese people to be disabled an effective way of protecting them?
Okay, so this is, of course, the $64,000 question. I guess it's a $64 million
these days, inflation.
So, can I just give a little background?
Sure.
Yeah, so I wrote this HuffPost because the Court of Justice of the European Union rendered a decision in December saying that although there was no express protection of obese people in the relevant legal documentation, there is a protection of disabled people, and in some circumstances obese people could be considered disabled and therefore seek legal protection. Right. So, and that sparked all sorts of controversies. So I've sort of taken it up, and incidentally, our Canadian courts are kind of inching towards protecting people through a liberal interpretation of disability to include obesity. And obviously, to the extent that that's protecting obese people from discrimination, I think it's a good thing.
Discrimination, you're talking here about legal discrimination,
yes.
as in jobs.
Yes,
and
thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
And that was the case in the Court of Justice European Union case. This was a childminder in Denmark who was obese and who incidentally had tried to lose weight on several occasions and couldn't successfully, and who was discharged and who claimed that he was discharged because he was obese. So the problem I see with this is that many obese people would not consider themselves disabled, right? I mean, they're not disabled, they're simply big. And society has to get past their bigness and look at the merits to decide whether they are qualified for the job. So the example that I gave in the HuffPost, and I think it's a really interesting example, there was an aerobics instructor in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and she was obese. But her classes were extremely well attended. Nobody ever complained about the fact that she wasn't doing a great job. And she applied for a jazzercise franchise. It's one of these particular kinds of aerobics. And the company said, no, we're not giving it to you. You don't fit our image. We need people who are lean and taut. So she said, this is discrimination. I can do the job. Nobody's complaining. It's just that you've got this corporate and societal image that people who are fit need to be thin. And that's simply not the case. So that particular story had a happy ending because there was a hullabaloo and kind of public outcry, and the one actually got the franchise. But my point here is she would not have considered herself in any way disabled. She would have said, look, we need to make adjustments so that a large person can go ahead and do the job based on her merits. And she had one great line that I quote on a number of occasions: judge me on my merits, not my measurements.
And we're going to leave it there right now. We're going to hold Bill Bogart over the break here at What She Said, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the question of whether a person who is obese should be considered disabled in the legal sense. Stay with us. Now, one of the things that happened was the European Union declaring it basically, a disability in the legal sense. But what would happen then with this if it came to pass in Canada? Would it be something that would be like on the job form? Do you identify yourself as a native, disabled is there, I believe now. Or would we see, fat or obese? Would this be something that provided that kind of legal protection in a job if you identified yourself as part of a minority group?
Well, we might get into it, we might not. I mean, the thing about being obese is that it's readily apparent. Unlike, for example, disabilities, some disabilities are hidden and one isn't immediately aware of them, and that gives rise to its own set of complexities. I mean, I think where it will come into play is, as I said, with the Jazzercise franchise, when people are applying for things or promotions or raises in pay, etc., etc. There's a very famous case in the United States of a telemarketer, and she again had done extremely well as a telemarketer. She was named Telemarketer of the Year. But she was obese, and she applied, based on that record, for a face-to-face job. She would have to interact with the public, and her employer said, we're looking for thinner and cuter women, so lose the weight and you might get the job.
I would imagine.
So that need to say that gave rise to a complaint.
As you're talking, I'm just imagining what the logistics will be to define this, because I have in fact worked with people who, they may not be skinny, but they look pretty fit to me, and they've been identified at a gym or something as clinically this far from the line in terms of obese because of BMI or whatever.
Well, that would be me. I'm on that line. I'm just on the right side of that line now.
So how defining that will be a huge challenge. And then I can imagine that people who are 5 pounds away from that would say, wow, all I need to do is gain 7 pounds and go in and say, hey, you can't discriminate against me. No, I know I've taken 4 sick days out of 5 for the last 6 months, but you know what? I am disabled.
No, but wait a second. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about merits, right? So it doesn't mean that just because somebody is obese, you have to give them the job. What it means is you can't give them the job just because they're obese.
Or
but
you can't not give them the job.
Exactly. So you can certainly look at the merits, and for example, if an employee is malingering in terms of taking sick days when they shouldn't take sick days, doesn't matter whether you're tall or thin or whatever, you can get at that.
But you've talked to that community. And what has the reaction been to the idea of getting legal protection from discrimination through that channel?
Well, this is very interesting. I think we actually need to hear more from that community about these kinds of developments. I mean, the fat rights activism is much more developed in the United States, and you're hearing voices on any number of issues. But I think I'm not saying that there aren't articulate voices in the obese community in Canada, but I think I certainly would like to hear more from them about what they think about legal protection and the route that should be taken. Because what I also talk about in the HuffPost is if we didn't move in terms of protecting obese people from discrimination on the grounds of disability, we could do something that a handful of states and cities in the United States have done, and a couple in Australia, and that is ban discrimination outright based on appearance. So some of the states in the United States, Michigan, some cities like San Francisco, Washington, D.C., prohibit discrimination based on appearance.
What does that entail? What does that mean? Appearance, your hair color, your
yes.
You cannot have you cannot not hire somebody with green hair if you don't feel like it.
Well, and actually, I've been that example has been given to me. So, what do you do if there's all sorts of nose rings and tattoos and purple hair, and he wants to be an investment banker, and question how many times that would ever arise, but the fact of the matter is there's usually exceptions built into the legislation so that appropriate business attire or
cleanliness,
yes,
grooming,
for public safety standards, exactly, are built in, so that those examples really don't arise, and when they do arise, they're taken care of by the legislation. I mean, I think my point here to you and to everyone is I want to contribute to a national discussion about the stigmatization that is forced upon obese people in this society.
Or even overweight people.
Yeah, and overweight people. And that society as a whole needs to back off that. Now, backing off that, one part of that is protecting obese people from discrimination legally. But it's just a piece of it, if you know what I'm saying. The larger terrain really is for us to back away from some of these hugely negative stereotypes we have of fat people.
But you can't. But changing a mindset like that is a very big task.
Yeah, it is.
So how would you suggest we go about it? Because there is, to me, a difference between somebody that is fat and fit,
right,
and somebody that is literally, watching TV and eating chocolate bars all day and never exercising.
Yeah, well, and remember the part of my sort of core statement is that we all need to eat and drink more nutritiously, and we have to be more physically active.
But you can't tell by looking at somebody necessarily how fit they are underneath that layer of fat.
No, I understand that, but then you'd get into those kinds of questions only when you need to in terms of employment or so on and so forth. I mean, if the jazzercise person, it's hard to imagine that she's not fit.
Right.
But the telemarketer might not be fit, but she can still do the job.
But in addition to this, there's the other element, which is, I think, when people look at overweight people, they are thinking about the health. They're thinking about children, looking at children, and they're thinking, this is a crime because this child is, we've all been taught that the extra weight hurts your heart and hurts, and cuts down your life. So it's partially, I guess it's a bias, but partially it's concern.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. And I think that's legitimate. But and again, I'm the one that's saying everybody needs to eat more healthfully and be physically active. But I think we have to understand that that fat child may be fat for reasons that have nothing to do with a poor diet. They may have Prader-Willi syndrome, right? Which is it is fairly rare, but it usually brings on compulsive eating. The child may have been given antibiotics within the first months of life. There's now studies that suggest that if a child is given antibiotics within the first 6 months of life, they are significantly at risk of being overweight by the age of 3.
I know, but Bill, you have to grant me this, that every week there's a study coming out on obesity and the rising level of obesity and the concern that health professionals have and educators have about children sitting in front of screens,
Yeah, no,
so,
and those are all good concerns.
Yes. So that's not exactly a bias. That's a national concern.
Yeah, no, and I think this is a really, really good point. We want to separate out concerns for health against specific acts of bias against fat people. I mean,
exactly,
that is a very important point. Thank you for helping me make it.
Well, I'm just doing my bit to start the national discussion.
All right, so Bill, tell us where people can. We know you have the article on the Huffington Post, and we'll put up a link to it. I think you're going to write. Either we're going to post a link to that, or have our very own blog posting from you on this. But where can people get hold of your books and more of your thoughts on this?
Well, thank you for asking. I contribute to the Huffington Post twice a month, so they can just follow me on Bill Bogart Huffington Post, and I guess I'm up to about 20 now, so any of them that piques their interest. My latest book is called Regulating Obesity, Government, Society, and Questions of Health, Oxford University Press, New York, and it's available at, as they say, at all the better bookstores, and of course online from Amazon. And so on.
Okay. That's always good to know. Well, thank you very much. It's a fascinating conversation, and an interest. I like to see. I'm looking forward to seeing where Canada goes with this legally. It'd be very, very interesting. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Click the channel subscribe button for full-length interviews and more from What She Said here on YouTube.